With this forum, what we are trying to do with the European Commission and my agency, the EASME agency, is to facilitate the dialogue among the key sustainable energy investment stakeholders. The objective for us is to foster more investment in energy efficiency, and it's not easy. It's extremely important because we need to do that if we want to respond to the urgent energy security and climate challenges, if we want to reinforce at the same time the competitiveness of our industry, and if we want to improve the quality of life of Europeans. We all know that investing in energy efficiency is facing a lot of barriers. Investments are small, and they are all very different from one another. Payback times are long. There is often no collateral, and so on and so forth. So many of these barriers are linked in our understanding to the lack of knowledge between investors, energy efficiency experts, and the public sector. And that's exactly what we are trying to do today, bring all of these actors together so that we can together identify and overcome those barriers to actual investment. We've organized a series of such sustainable energy investment forums across Europe. It's our 13th event. We have 22 events organized all together. I would like to thank the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy, because without you we would not be here today. Thank you for hosting the event today in Frankfurt. The 3 member states on which we are focusing today, France, Germany, and Austria, are doing actually a lot to advance sustainable energy investment. Not only by putting in place ambitious policies, but also by being very active on the ground. And these countries in particular are very active in the European Horizon 2020 program that we are managing, in, for instance, sending more than 400 participants who participate in 160 projects in those 3 countries alone under this Horizon 2020 program. So thank you for your commitment. The day ahead will be an opportunity to exchange ideas, experiences. It's a step for us to build a sustainable energy investment community. And we will have, for the welcome address, the honor of having Stefan Besser, Head of Unit for Energy Efficiency and Rational Use of Energy at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy, and then Paul Hodson, Head of the Energy Efficiency Unit at the Directorate General for Energy of the European Commission. So, Stefan, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear Julien, dear Paul Hodson, thank you very much for taking the initiative for this conference and exchange of views and opinions on the issue of energy efficiency finance. First of all, I have to excuse Thorsten Herdan, our Director General. Unfortunately, he had to stay in Berlin due to other appointments, and he has asked me to stand in for him, and I will report back tomorrow on this conference and the results. As we are in Frankfurt and translation is available, I will do the rest of my introduction in German, so please use your earphones as far as you need them.
This conference today takes place parallel to the member state conference in Katowice, to the climate protection Katowice conference. We have a new report of the World Climate Council in which it is said that the current development of emissions, that it can be expected that the global temperature will increase by 3 degrees and even more, perhaps, which is in contradiction to what was agreed in an international level with the Paris Agreement, a limitation of the to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees to limit the risks of climate change. We know that We have to step our efforts. Even for Germany, it is true that our aims, we will not reach our aims and our targets. We have, as regards the next decade until 2030, we have to step up our efforts and increase our measures in order to fulfill our targets and objectives vis-à-vis also the European community. In Germany, we can see, as regards energy and climate policy, we see a certain focus in those areas in which the German turnover in climate policy has not put the focus on over the past 8 years since the turnover in energy policy was agreed upon. We dealt with the transformation of the power generating sector, which is a very important subject, but now we have to put a higher focus on heat and buildings, but also on the decarbonation of traffic and transport. These are huge challenges which we have to face, which also require huge investments, of course. And in order to bring the transformation process in these fields to a successful conclusion. The great tasks, that also means that when using the available resources, capital, staff, the know-how, etc., we have to be as efficient as possible. And efficiency also means that all this cannot be done only with public funds, but that we also have to use private capital and have to mobilize private capital and use it in a smart manner. So how, together with public and private capital, we can advance our cause. In the framework of the G20 presidency last year, the International Energy Agency and the Agency for Renewable Energy, ARENA, were asked to calculate a scenario for the investment requirements to implement a 2-degree scenario. This study determines a long-term investment requirement in energy-efficient measures of $1,500 billion for the period 2040 to 2050. Today, we spend about $220 billion worldwide annually in energy efficiency, which means that we need 5 or 6 times as much. And I think that is a good description of the challenge we are faced with. Efficiency measures often have a good high return on invest, but we know, and Julien, you mentioned it very briefly, there are lots of hurdles and obstacles and barriers which lead to the fact that the high potential for economic energy potential measures is not exhausted to its full extent. One of the hurdles are the high transaction cost for the sometimes small investment amounts in investment, for example, in the refurbishment of buildings, etc. That's where we want to start to work. In Germany, we have launched a project which will also be introduced. That project is called ACE, Asset Class Energy Efficiency. We started this project in Germany. The Baden-Württemberg Climate and Energy Agency is going to introduce that project. And with this project, we want to contribute to standardize investments into energy efficiency, to standardize the evaluation and the rating, and thus to create the possibility to bundle small investment activities, and thus we hope we can contribute to a higher commitment of the financing sector into the financing of such measures. We are very happy that the Commission, in the course of the EFIC process, they sponsored and fund further projects which go to the same direction. We hope that with these activities we can successfully contribute to find some capital investors and providers, and also to stimulate them to come up with new business models. And in this sense, I hope that we have some fruitful and insightful debates today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And now the floor is yours, Paul. Directorate General for Energy, European Commission.
Good morning. This is my third time in Frankfurt this year. The previous 2 times I was changing trains. The first time I missed my train at Frankfurt Airport and got back to Brussels many hours late. The second time my train was cancelled at Frankfurt main station and I got back to Brussels many hours late. So it's a real delight to come to Frankfurt, actually to come to Frankfurt and and also to arrive on time and be at an event on time and be able to sample the joys of this city. How do I make this go? No, not like that. Why am I unable to? Voila. Okay, I want to say a little bit about what we think the context is for energy efficiency financing. And given that the European Commission last week adopted the long-term strategy for climate and energy up to 2050, it really provides a very clear context. We have come up with 8 different scenarios, 5 of which would deliver 80 to 85% reductions of greenhouse gas emissions relative to 1990 levels. 1 which is a little bit more would go to 90%, and 2 which would go to 100%. There's a lot of detail about them on the slide. The key point is that all of them, if you look at the major common assumptions, all of them have higher, significantly higher energy efficiency efforts post-2030. And when I say higher, I don't mean higher than today. I mean higher than the objective we've already agreed, which was voted in the Council yesterday, of 32.5% for 2030. And that objective itself is significantly more demanding than the objectives we have for 2020. So we really are, there isn't a way to get to even the easier targets for 2050, let alone the targets that are associated with a 1.5 degree warming, without a big, big increase in energy efficiency. Sorry, I'm clearly, my bad luck, thank you. This one, thank you very much, that's perfect. So this diagram gives you some indication of the ranges of extra investment that would be needed in the different scenarios. The key point again is that in the residential sector, we need an extra 200 to 250 billion a year, and nearly all of that is in energy efficiency. And as I say, this is on top of the increases we're already going to need to deliver just to get to the 2030 objectives. So, of course, there are massive benefits from doing this. Of course, those benefits are not just in terms of reduced energy consumption, but they also relate to reduced dependence on imports of Russian gas. They relate to more jobs for building workers. They relate to healthier homes and less. I mean, we know the story about the benefits, but the fact remains we have to get that money coming in, or none of those benefits are going to be delivered. So, as I say, the strategy identifies 7 key points that are needed under all of the outcomes, and energy efficiency comes first on all of those lists. And within that, buildings are the single most important sector. So we need to deliver that change. The International Energy Agency has been developing methods of tracking investment in energy efficiency, which is notoriously difficult to do. I mean, if I buy a new television and it costs less than the old television, but it uses half as much energy, is that an energy efficiency investment, or is it just an investment in a television? But they've been developing a methodology to track those things, and they're showing that global energy efficiency investment is still growing. It grew by 3% in 2017. It also shows that Europe continues to be the strongest investor in energy efficiency, with about 1/3 of the world's investment in energy efficiency coming in Europe. And they also show that, again, buildings are the most important area, with 60% of energy efficiency investment is going into buildings, 15% into industry, and 25% into transport. So that indicates that at least we're not moving fast enough in the right direction, but at least in terms of investment, we are moving in the right direction. Stefan Besser and indeed Julien mentioned the issue of payback times. We have a database called DEEP, which I'll say a bit more about later on, and this is some data from that database about the payback times that real energy efficiency projects which have been built and which have been measured in terms of how much they cost really and how much energy savings they really delivered, what the payback times are. And it shows that in that database, the projects that we've identified that are in the industrial sector are paying back within 2 years. Building projects are paying back in 5 years, but within our database, residential building projects are showing a payback time of 10 years. 10 years is still a pretty good deal compared with what you could get by putting your money in the bank, but at the same time, it's an indicator of why it's difficult to persuade people to make those sorts of investments spontaneously. And why don't people make those investments? Because we actually demand payback times of around 2 years. If you look at academic analysis of the discount rates that people are looking for investments in energy efficiency, they're looking for nearly a 50% discount rate. So when I say people, I mean us, I mean me. I mean, in my house in Brussels, which I've just sold incidentally, so I won't be able to use that as an example for much longer, but in my house in Brussels, there are plenty of good investments. And for a long time, there was a hole in the roof that was letting out our warm air. And we only got around to dealing with that after we'd done various other things with our money. I mean, the illogic with which we decide to invest in energy efficiency, somebody said, what's the payback time of a new settee? You buy a new settee because you want a new settee, because it's comfortable to watch your new television on. You don't ask what the payback time is, but at the same time, if it's a question of mending holes in the roof, people are saying, well, will it pay for itself? Can I afford it? So the framework within which people are making decisions, and industry is no better, as you know, the framework within which people are making these decisions to invest means that we're looking for very long payback times, very short payback times. The gap between the financial benefit of investments in energy efficiency and our willingness to make those investments is what makes public policy necessary. It's not because we need to subsidise investment in energy efficiency. It's simply that somewhere or other the market doesn't yet exist which is delivering the kind of investments that we need to make. So we've identified, or rather we asked the Energy Efficiency Financial Institutions Group to work with us, and Peter Sweetman, who will be talking later, was the rapporteur for that group, and there are plenty of other people here who are involved in this. We identified 4 things that need to be done in order to get those markets working properly. The first one was to establish a consistent regulatory framework so that industry, so that the finance sector would know that this is a sector worth investing in over the medium and long term. The second one was aggregation. Julien mentioned this, the need to overcome the heterogeneity and small size of typical energy efficiency investments. The third one was de-risking, to change the assessment in the financial sector of the apparent riskiness of these investments because they weren't understood. And the fourth one was to use public money better, not to use public money as we've tended to use it, to pay the grants for the cost of these investments, but to use public money to trigger as much as possible private investment and to build as much as possible the private markets and the private private markets that we need. So those have been the things that we've been working towards. They were the recommendations that were made to us by the energy efficiency finance sector, and they've been the recommendations we've been working towards over the last few years. To say something about the policy framework, the European Commission proposed in November 2016 a set of pieces of energy efficiency legislation. That included a revision to the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directive. Both of those have been adopted. The Energy Performance of Buildings Directive requires every member state to set out a strategy for renovation of existing buildings. That strategy has to run up to 2050 and has to include a finance chapter. So that's one of the elements which at a national level should mean that by the time that's done, end of 2019, beginning of 2020, there is a clear plan, at least for the building sector at national level, of how these markets need to evolve. At European level, and I mentioned it already, we've adopted the revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive, which among other things sets a clear objective for 2030 in terms of energy savings. And finally, in that sort of way, we're working on a series of specific measures for those parts of the energy efficiency sector which are part of the internal market. So minimum energy performance requirements for televisions, for computers, for fridges, the whole range of consumer products. We are updating those requirements in order to ensure that they deliver as much energy efficiency as possible, which will mean that many of these are products which are used in buildings, whether it's air conditioners or heaters or whatever, which will mean that those products, when buildings are renovated, the products that are used in those buildings will have a high level of energy performance. But today is a conference about France, Austria and Germany, and it's almost not possible to do this work at national level. It's certainly not possible to do this work at European level. This is what we're talking about is bringing about change in local and regional and national markets. And so it's very good to be in a place where all three of the countries that are represented have a strong track record. I could have made many slides about examples, but Germany's work with energy efficiency networks in industry is an example for the whole of Europe. Austria's work in street lighting is another area where Austria has not only delivered many projects within Austrian cities, but has also put together or led a project which has led to street lighting improvements in many other cities across Europe. And France, what I love about the Energy Positive project is that France, having delivered through public investment improvements to social housing, has then found a way also to get investment by condominiums from private housing to get people within those condominiums to choose to invest in improving the fabric of the buildings, which is a challenge that many member states face. So those are three of the examples, and I hope we will hear more about them and things like that today. I've been talking about the long term, but it is important to talk about the short term too. And we have to recognize that after a period, up until 2014, if I was standing here in 2015, 2016, I'd be saying, hey, we've got a real track record of success. All we need to do is to build on that. But the data that we've now received or been receiving about what's been happening to energy consumption in Europe over the last 3 years, I mean 2015, 16 and 17, shows that after a long period of going down, energy consumption has been going up again. We've been working with member states to identify what measures they're putting in place that can hopefully reverse that trend. We will, and Germany, well, all the three member states that are represented here have identified things that they're doing, but it's not enough to say we need 250 billion more investment a year next decade. We also need to ensure that we meet our targets for 2020. And on our part, we'll be working with national, for example, with national market surveillance authorities to ensure that product standards are actually being fulfilled. I mentioned earlier on I'd just like to end with a couple of examples of the things that we're doing, which we hope that people from within member states can take more advantage of. The first one is the deep database, where we've now got about 10,000 examples, as I say, of real projects, ex-post evaluation of their costs and benefits. The more projects we put into that database, the more individual project promoters will be able to compare and benchmark their projects against the stock of others. But here we have some data about both the payback times and the cost of savings in terms of Eurocents per kilowatt hour for the projects that are in that database in France, Austria and Germany. I hope very much that anybody here who is responsible for portfolios of energy efficiency projects would want to feed those projects into the database. But in addition, if you're just interested to see the results, please go to the database and take advantage of that. A second program that I would like to talk about, and Ralph Goldman from the European Investment Bank is here and is our partner in running the ELENA program. The ELENA program is about giving, it started out with cities and regions, but now it's a broader approach, but giving project promoters grants to put together financeable investment projects in the energy efficiency sector, with the projects needing to deliver at least 20 times as much energy savings as the grants. I've given some examples here of how that has been used in the three countries that this event is about. But I think a more important message is the one in the next slide, which I think is my last slide, which shows if you look at per capita investment, then none of the 3 member states is among the biggest consumers of this source of money. This is good money for really helping you put together financeable projects. And Denmark and the Netherlands historically have been extremely good at coming up with projects. On a per capita basis, as you can see, also Spain, Italy and the UK have been good at that, but I'm really surprised not to have seen more involvement from France, Italy, for France, Austria and Germany, and I hope that some of you here will be interested to go and look at that and see whether there are opportunities there. And this is really one of the ways in which we address the need for aggregation. I mean, a classic example would be a project with the region of Paris where you put together 1,000 investment projects in 1,000 schools, and it's much easier to get investment in 1,000 schools than it is to get 1,000 projects each investing in one school's renovation. But there are many, many possibilities. Henriette, who came in, has been using the same program on the transport side, and we've been getting investment in electrification and in urban tram systems. So there are many possibilities to use this program, and I would like to think that one of the practical results of today would be more use of it from these countries. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
And now our next speaker with a keynote speech to open the day for us is Dr. Claus Stickler, who is Managing Director and Global Co-Lead of Allianz Investment Management. Allianz Investment Management has a portfolio of 650 billion euro. Dr. Stickler holds himself a PhD in economics, and he worked at McKinsey before joining Allianz in 1999, where he has served in several senior management positions. So the floor is yours, Mr. Stickler.
Good morning. And first and foremost, many thanks for the friendly invite. It's really a great pleasure. It's a great honor to have the opportunity to share our view as a long-term investor on sustainable finance with you. It's really great. Many thanks. While reading and watching news these days, one could really get the impression that achieving the 2 degrees target, or even below, is a mission impossible. And in our perspective, to be very honest, this perception is by far too pessimistic. We strongly believe that achieving the 2 degrees target is a mission possible. Nevertheless, we must not be naive, and we need to be courageous, innovative, and really determined to manage the challenges along the journey towards a net zero carbon emission world. Energy efficiency will be one of the key drivers to reach the goal, and therefore events like today are key factors of success. Sharing good and best practice examples, bringing together the right stakeholders, and discussing how to tap into business opportunities are crucial elements of this journey. Paul gave a very good overview on the challenges on this journey, and therefore I keep my part here very short and only want to highlight 2 findings from the latest energy efficiency report. Finding number 1, investments in energy efficiency must immediately double and double again after 2025. And finding 2, even more impressive, until 2040, cumulative investments would need to grow by a factor 7 to be on a track consistent with a well below 2 degrees target. This amounts up to $35 trillion in total, a number of which most people not even know how many digits this number has. To put it in a nutshell, the problem to foster energy efficiency to the necessary level is scalability. Or, to say it very bluntly, how to get fast to the big numbers. Please allow me to briefly explain how we at Allianz are covering sustainability topics within our investments. Allianz is a liability-driven, long-term and large-scale investor. And at Allianz, sustainability in general is at the core of the entire investment process. Since 2015, we have a holistic approach in place to integrate environmental, social, and governance topics into our portfolios. We take concrete actions across 4 areas of impact we think which are important: dedicated investments, engagement, disclosure, and network. Let me give you some very concrete examples. We invested more than 20 billion into low carbon assets. And our plans are to grow within these asset classes over proportionally with a strong growth rate. We run an ESG scoring for the entire portfolios around the globe with regard to our listed assets for 2 reasons. A, to give guidance to our portfolio managers, and B, to identify those issuers we would like to start intensive engagement processes to understand better how they want to improve their ESG scores. Additionally, we excluded certain industries like coal-based business models. Nevertheless, we do think that exclusions are only a measure of last resort, and this will be never sufficient. On the disclosure side, we disclose according to TCFD and report to several organizations like CDP. For us, as a large-scale investor, standardized, reliable climate disclosure are really of a high interest for 2 reasons. Firstly, to be able to assess the current climate risk and opportunities of our current portfolios, but even more relevant, to really give guidance and to allow efficient and effective investment decisions going forward. This year in spring, we decided to join the Science Based Targets initiative to commit ourselves in developing and keeping a below 2 degrees pathway. And with this step, we also hope to help to convince others to join also this initiative, really to make a difference. And last but not least, we try to initiate and we strive to join networks and initiatives with industry and thought leaders. Only in a joint effort, and here we are really convinced, only in a joint effort we will see real impact. In order to gain momentum, to coordinate action, and to maximize synergies, we are suggesting a kind of new public-private partnership in which all relevant stakeholders are represented, but also all relevant stakeholders will contribute. Policymakers who encourage energy efficiency technologies, policymakers who ensure the necessary level of transparency via disclosure guidelines, and who take care of a reliable, rational, and long-term oriented regulation. NGOs, academia, and consultancies who provide transparency and methodology to move from a sector-specific solution approach to a holistic approach, and who show pathways towards a balanced economy. Corporates who develop and implement their respective pathways towards a 2-degree goal, and here initiatives like SPDI can really help and give guidance, and corporates who develop and implement new solutions in energy efficiency, for instance, by fostering circular economies. And lastly, institutional investors like us who optimize their portfolios to support and fund the transition towards net zero carbon emissions and who set up structures to bundle projects efficiently. Policymakers, NGOs, consultancies, corporates, and institutional investors, all together, we need to set up and drive networks for industry and thought leaders. Currently, we are observing that many of those networks and initiatives are set up. On the one hand side, this is really good because it shows that many stakeholders are really committed and want to act. However, on the other side, we really need to be cautious and we need to avoid fragmented networks, but really to bundle forces to ensure efficiency, also time efficiency and effectiveness. If we are able to set up this kind of new public-private partnerships, I'm really convinced that energy efficiency and reaching a net zero carbon emission world are a mission possible. We, as Allianz, are committed to support and to contribute to this journey. Many thanks.
Well, thank you very much for these encouraging words.